People are going to pay to hear your music.
Well, it's not actually the music they're paying for. It has more to do with my sex appeal.
Say hello, America. We are part of the new USA.
Hey, everybody. Here's another episode of Qué Pasa podcast, the watch-along podcast for the iconic series Qué Pasa, U.S.A. We are going to be leading up to the celebration of its 50th anniversary. And today we are going to talk about episode number 5 of this first season titled Noche Cubana. I am Mimi Belt. I am here with my son, Danny Mendoza. And for those of you who may not have caught episode 1, what we will be doing throughout this entire series is taking a look at each episode of Qué Pasa USA as we lead up to its 50th anniversary. We're going to each take a moment and what was our favorite moment or our moment of takeaway or reflection and talk about it. I would talk about a few other things in the show in the hopes that you will watch it and that you will listen along with us and watch along with us. With that, say hi, Danny.
Hi, Danny. I'm the son again. I continue to be and will continue to be the son mentioned here. Hi, everybody. I'm Danny Mendoza, he, him, and I am very glad that you all are here with us to celebrate the legacy of this show. We know that this show has meant a lot to a lot of people for half a century now. It holds up, generally speaking, is what I'm finding as we go through still what are the early days. We're just 5 episodes into the first season now. A little bit of what we encountered in this one, you could feel the 50 years in some ways, at least I could. And in some ways, it made me sad that you couldn't, you know? That some of this stuff feels very, very relevant today. So, yeah, I'm very excited to dig into our 2 moments and break this episode open through that framework. Do you want to go first with yours, or do you want me to go?
Sure. Well, I was just thinking about what you just said and the parts of the show that definitely harken to the 1970s, just to set up my moment a little bit. Is this idea of even the furnishings, the setting, the moment that we're in sort of threw me back into that time. Pepe comes home and he puts on obviously a vinyl record, which is back again. But the fact that he plays it on a phonograph that's built into a piece of furniture in their house. Seriously, every Cuban family I knew, including my own, had one of those.
I just hope you didn't buy another one of those oldies but goodies Cuban records.
And so it actually brought me back to the 1970s. I think in terms of moment, very shortly after that, what kind of sparked it off for me was the moment in which Pepe calls Joe
Mira, cubano arrepentido.
un cubano arrepentido, a Cuban who is no longer proud to be Cuban. And that was because I believe a lot of the show, if not all of the show, is the idea that time has moved on.
Come on, Mom. That old music is the pits.
People have moved on. The Cuban culture may not be as relevant, or so feel Pepe, Juana, to some extent the grandparents, and even Carmen, who's the youngest of the family. Why is it that their culture is suddenly not feeling relevant and giving way to more modern music, to rock and roll, to the kinds of things Joe likes?
¿Por qué no ponen un poco de salsa? Or some rock? Or some disco?
And so I think the core for me of that theme was that moment when his father accuses him of sort of turning his back on his culture, because in that he's saying, well, we feel like our music, our culture, our language maybe even isn't as relevant anymore and is giving away not only to the fact that we're living in this country, but also the fact that time is progressing and things are more modern now than when we were leaning into this music back in our homeland.
Yo quiero silencio para escuchar mi disco. Música de rock. Mira que hay que escuchar salvajadas modernas ahora.
So in relation to that, I picked up on something that I thought was so telling in a hyper-specific way that made me feel good, made me feel like this is written more inside out than outside in. This isn't other people trying to tell our stories about us, but us telling our stories about ourselves, which is that when Joe was saying, hey, why don't you do this kind of music, that kind of music that's popular now, said rock and roll, and that was the big one that was referenced, right, throughout the episode.
Yeah.
But also said salsa. And so what's interesting about that, especially since this was made in the 1970s, is that for those of you listening to this who may not be aware of this, salsa is a thing that was invented in New York City. And it was created by a bunch of folks who were immigrants from Latin American countries. and mixing together a lot of much more delineated, historically speaking, musical traditions, right? Largely from the Caribbean, but not exclusively from the Caribbean. And obviously, there's a lot of really prominent, important, and influential salsa that has come out since then that has come from all over Latin America. That is such a specifically authentic thing. I say, not having even been alive in the 1970s, but from what I understand, because to not just the grandparents, but to the parents, to Pepe and Juana, salsa is not their music.
Right. No, and I love that you brought that up because honestly, in the second watching, I didn't zero in on that. And as you were talking now, I was reminded of Tito Puente. And many of you listening hopefully will know who Tito Puente was, one of the great, great percussionists of Latin music. And he would always say that salsa became so popular, but salsa meant nothing to him because salsa to him is like tomato sauce, like salsa de tomate, but not music because he felt that, and he knew that salsa really came out of a combination of influences of Latin music. El son, el danzón, el guaguancó, like a lot of different actual rhythms that and music that came from Latin American countries fused together and what we know today to be salsa. But to him, that wasn't an actual genre of music back in the 70s. So it's interesting that you say that. Yeah.
I mean, arguably, genres are often less artistic. This is a hot take. And more about marketing, right? So I think that this likely reflects that to some degree. Even calling it salsa, I don't remember off the top of my head who coined it, but part of the popularity may come from the fact that a lot of non-Latin American folks or people who don't carry that heritage, right, will look at how we express ourselves with passion, what we care about, how we express that care, and we'll refer to it and sometimes refer to our food in relation to it and all that with things like this is spicy, this is et cetera, et cetera. Also turning us, and this happens to a lot of marginalized folks, kind of into food, right, when they talk about us. So I can understand why Tito Puente maybe is like, hey, you know that music I've dedicated my life to? Not a food. So that's fair. I say that having grown up loving salsa, and from my time when I was born in the late 80s and born here in the United States, my reaction to that is to think that salsa is a bridge into my traditions, right? So that's part of why it struck me in a way that might not have stood out to you the same way when I was watching this, to be like, oh, that's a big thing, right?
Yeah.
That this is the new cool music to Joe. Carmencita, as a contrast, did know more about those musical traditions.
She did.
Because she did actually care more about that. So she's setting up a lot of music in the show that is more traditionally Cuban. So you have, there again, you see the sociology of this show. One of the kids is more into the more traditional elements of their tradition. One of the kids is less into the more traditional elements of the tradition. The one that's more into it does struggle, understandably, with, hey, the only people who care about this are the people who are older.
Old people are the only ones who like this stuff.
Whereas the people who are her peers, she felt, wouldn't really care about it, which didn't necessarily reflect the reality in the end, but did reflect a very real concern that is relatable and that wasn't just true in the 70s. I remember when I was much younger that I faced similar sorts of considerations, and arguably to some degree there's still considerations related to that people face now.
Yeah. What about you though? What was your moment?
Oh, geez. Yeah. So my moment has to do with music also, and I'm cheating a little bit here with how I do this, but it's actually all the way at the end when Juana sings so beautifully.
Cuando me falte tu calor, mi bien.
And she was a trained singer in Cuba. She had stopped singing. Pepe alluded to this.
The last time she sang, it was the Ave Maria at her cousin's wedding. And her cousin never talked to her again.
She made some excuses with relation to that, but she said, nope.
This time I have time to practice. Ay, Mommy, it's gonna be neat to have you sing in our show.
When she sings during the actual show, she does a bad job because she gets very emotional, right? She becomes overwhelmed with what I understood to be stage fright, essentially. Like gets the yips, right? Like a lot of people do.
¿A dónde si no es a tu pecho?
I find it relatable because I actually don't feel very comfortable singing in front of people. Even though I'm a trained performer, I've been a trained storyteller my whole life. I get it. You know what I mean? And I don't have the voice that she has. But even if I did, that wouldn't change what goes on in my head about it. So I found that moving. I found her yearning for it that you talked about earlier in the episode in a scene with Carmencita where she burns clothing multiple times while she's having this conversation because she gets lost in reverie.
At least I'm glad about one thing. ¿Qué cosa? That when you came to this country, you didn't go into the laundry business.
Honestly, to me, this was Juana's episode, right?
Yeah.
I mean, there's a lot of other stuff that happened, but and then to get to hear her sing beautifully, and then honestly, seeing the admiration, the unadulterated joy and support and love from her family while they watched and listened as she sang so beautifully at the end, I thought was a lovely button to the episode that really spoke to how art transcends these often quite artificially constructed and socially enforced determinants. Because the reality is that beautiful music that existed before any of us was born is still beautiful music. And we might not have the context for that culturally that was the same as when it was first created, but we can receive it in a new way that can still be deeply appreciated. And there's no reason why the older generations there wouldn't be able to connect with the newer stuff too. There's nothing that actually locks them out of it outside of artificiality. So in its way, I do believe that this episode spoke to that really interestingly. How did it strike you, Mom?
Couple different things. So as I see her singing and see the admiration in her family, I totally agree with you. I think we often get too caught up in what we think is cool or what we think is new and strange, depending on what your generation is, right? The younger generation, well, this isn't cool. And the older generation say, esta rareza, this doesn't make any sense. This modern stuff, I don't get it. It's a rejection before you even give it a chance, right? Before you even give it a chance to listen to it. And you're right. I think good music is good music, no matter what the era. I think can be appreciated across the generations. I mean, this is getting off topic from the show and more into our lives, but you know, you were raised on my music. And you were raised to appreciate the Beatles. Not every child of your generation was.
Well, and a bunch of folk music also from the time that you were coming up around the same time, as well as all sorts of other musical traditions and a lot of Cuban and other Latin American musical traditions that opened up. And obviously I was subject, as anybody is, to interest in more modern music too, right?
Yeah.
What was modern?
All of
at
it,
the
like
time?
whatever is good. And for me too, I didn't stop liking music because I was no longer consuming it in my 20s or in my 30s. And it was coming on the scene when I was in my 40s or my 50s. The music is still good music, right? So I think that was part of it. I think too, just a peek behind the scenes here for Ana Margarita Menendez, who plays Juana. Obviously, she is a trained singer and a beautiful singer as well. She had come, for those of you who don't know, from the Spanish Repertory Theater in New York, El Repertorio Español. She, as far as I know, after the series was over, went back to New York. I think she still lives in New York and went back to the Spanish Repertory Theater. So she was part also of perpetuating the music of the zarzuelas, of things that were maybe my mother's era, right? Of the 50s even, and still making it relevant in the city of New York and continuing to sing these operettas, right? That originated in Spain, but were very, very popular in Latin America. And so I think it was also her episode because it was Ana's episode. It was Ana's moment to show everybody another dimension of her as an artist.
Well, and one thing that I love to see in any story, and especially a story that was made in the 1970s, we still, obviously live in a very sexist world in a lot of ways. And for this story to have really centered her personhood so fully, right? Again, thinking about that part of the episode where she's doing domestic work, right? And speaking with her daughter and thinking about her art and thinking about how it made her feel.
Ay, a mí me encantan las canciones cubanas.
Sí, hija, son preciosas. Y sería una pena que por la novelería de lo moderno la juventud se olvidara de ellas.
And you see the joy come across and the yearning to reconnect with it. And then you see her fight for it in spite of her husband pushing back on it, right?
Please, don't put any more crazy ideas in her head. Juana, vas a hacer el papelazo del año.
We end up finding out her husband was pushing back on it less from a sexist place and more from a I know that you get scared when you perform in front of people place.
Yeah.
But the show, as I understood it, I don't want to speak for the people who made it, but the impression I get is they did that on purpose as a bit of a bait and switch, right? To give us a sense that like, oh, Pepe's just being sexist. He just doesn't want his wife to embarrass him, because that is a lot of how he talked about it.
Or
He
even
didn't
get
talk
on a
about it.
stage, right?
Right.
I mean, to cut
No,
you out.
no.
Like maybe he, some of what I was interpreting there was, is this a Cuban husband not wanting his wife to stand on a stage and perform, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that is what the audience would have been expected to assume at the time by the people creating this. And I think even now, it's how a lot of people would read that. So I think that feels very fresh in the sense of, oh, this is somebody being machista, who is just trying to be controlling of his wife and is more worried about his ego and his image than her happiness.
Honey, you can't even sing in the shower anymore.
And then it comes back around to it's more complicated than that, actually.
Actually, was trying to protect her.
Right.
Yeah.
And it doesn't change the fact that he still could have talked about it better. Do you know what I mean? Like he still should have talked about it better. But that's what the show was interrogating on purpose. Speaking of interrogating things on purpose, this is a little bit to the side, but talking about the show, because the show was a big thing for everybody in this episode, right? Noche Cubana is the name of the episode. That's the Noche Cubana. It's the show that is being put together. I'd love to, in relation to what you brought up with your point, first talk about Joe's arc, because I thought at the beginning of the episode that this was going to be more of a Joe episode. I could tell it wasn't going to be about the grandparents, and it wasn't really. They had some amazing
Had some
lines.
zingers as usual.
Both
the
of them.
obstaculo line was incredible.
Yeah. Well, why don't you say something about that?
We talked about it in earlier episodes. Not every episode is the grandparents, but they always have a zinger. They always have several zingers. Antonio had his, Adela had hers. And both Luis and Velia's delivery is just extraordinary. And they only need a few seconds of a zinger to make it memorable. So, like, to me, just even her delivery, when they were talking about Juana and Juana's career and how Juana's career was thwarted, she stands up to defend her daughter and says,
Juanita pudo haber sido una gran cantante si no se hubiera encontrado algunos obstáculos en su camino.
I want you to know, she says to Pepe, that she would have had an incredible career if there weren't for a few obstáculos in her way, obviously talking about her son-in-law. And just the way she lands that she filled the room, right? She filled the scene, she filled the room. So no, not about her, but what a great moment. And also speaking to what you were just talking about before, where she's there trying to stick up for her daughter.
She's calling out the machismo that we were just talking about, right? The idea that he got in the way of her having, let's say, an artistic career. Yeah. Not just a career, because in general, we've seen him before not want her to work, and that's part of what played into the expectations here, but also specifically an artistic one, right?
Yep.
Which is very, very easy, even today, for a lot of people to dismiss out of hand without knowing what they're talking about, right? And Pepe wouldn't, as far as we know at this point in the story, have much occasion in his life to know a lot about that sort of thing, right? Great to see Adela sticking up for her daughter. And from a feminist perspective of like, oh, this dude here, he's the reason. My daughter's great at singing, actually. He's the reason that she's not able to do this sort of thing. I thought that was great. And it's funny because in both of these examples, arguably, the more progressive and enlightened position is coming from the grandparents. Because the other moment that Antonio had was he came out, he was helping to bring out a wardrobe that was for a femme presenting person, right? For a woman. And they, Joe, youngest guy in this group, makes a sexist joke at him. And that one that, using the parlance of today, we would recognize as transphobic.
Can't you see everything changing? That's why abuelos become a transvestite.
Búrlate que te voy a dar un carterazo.
The writers did this not because they were promoting transphobia, but because they were interrogating it, right? they wanted Joe to look bad with regard to that. And the thing that tells you that is Antonio's response.
Yeah, I thought that was so cool because he didn't say, I'm going to punch you, un piñazo. He literally got back at him by saying, I'm going to slap you with my purse.
Yeah.
And that was awesome.
It was such a perfect way to undercut this chamaco's attempt at attacking his grandfather's sense of masculinity with a joke. And instead of being defensive from a machista perspective, to your point, he leaned in and was like, yep, I'm gonna smack you with my purse, right? And no apology, no, like for helping out with this, no attempt at explaining that. I thought that was great. A lot of people would have the oldest generation be bigoted when it came to these things, be the least feminist, be the least progressive when it came to like gender representation. And for the 1970s, in a way that felt very natural and that likely reflected positively the true beliefs of the people involved in creating this show, they not only sidestepped that, but did something better than a lot of stories do today, right? So I thought that was really
better
cool
than
to
a
see.
lot of stories do today. And just quickly before I forget, this particular episode, yes, written by Luis Santero together with Pepe Bahamonde. So both of you, I hope you guys get to listen to what we're saying because we'd love for you to weigh in on the stuff that you did. But I think the two of them together writing this had a big hand in those seemingly small moments that were very telling and very, very, very cool.
So we all owe a debt of
We
gratitude
do.
to them infinitely for that.
And actually a bit of an aside because it's overarching on the beyond the episode on the series itself. But when you talk about the influence, Pepe, he created the names of the characters
and the name of the show.
He
also came up. It wouldn't be Qué Pasa U.S.A. if Pepe hadn't come up with the name Qué Pasa USA.
So there was a whole lot of creative input beyond this particular episode or this particular script. Where Pepe, I would say Pepe, Luis, and then Bernie, because Errol directed the pilot, but not the rest of them.
And did a great job with the pilot.
And did a wonderful job. But beyond that pilot episode, then it was the trifecta, right, of Luis, Pepe, and Bernie.
Yeah. And the cast. The cast that it wouldn't have been the same show if it weren't the same folks. And as we get along, going through more of these episodes, and then things progress later on, we'll see what the influence is on changes with casting and things like that. But to round this out, one thing I did want to mention is two things. One is Violeta, 10 out of 10 every time. You know what I mean? Like just
amazing.
Talking about the cast. We tend to focus on the family, but there are supporting characters that are already here and more that will be joining later that we'll get to when those episodes come around. They do incredible work. Want to take a second to spotlight both Violeta and
Sharon.
Violeta and Sharon had incredible roles in this. Violeta was very, very funny. There was even like a one-off person during the show where Violeta's in this melodramatic scene with a guy who's not Cuban, who's English only, right? And he hams it up being just a terrible actor. And that was very
on
fun.
purpose.
On purpose.
The character was a terrible actor.
Yeah, the character. When I say hams it up, I mean had a good time. Being bad on purpose. There was a bunch of being bad on purpose in the show within a show that I thought was really well handled. And Violeta did a great job in that, and in the earlier parts that she's in, she's always great.
Where she's singing off key on purpose.
Cultivo una rosa blanca en junio como en enero.
Sharon is also always great, consistently funny. I think something you said off mic before is worth stating on mic, but I want to give you credit for it, Mom, because you said it really well, which is that Sharon feels like Phoebe before Phoebe, referencing the character from Friends, right? This exact character feels like a real individual human person. This type of character, where it's very easy to underestimate their intelligence, and they deliver some of the funniest lines in the show, and to deliver them with fantastic timing is really, really great. In this situation, to incorporate her, they interrogated the theme of whether or not, and this is just in the subplot, whether or not it's okay for her to be a part of the show. And she admits to feeling left out, and she gets asked, well, why do you even want to be a part of the show when you're not Cuban?
It's not because it's a Cuban show. I just want to be on the stage. Any stage.
Which is charming the way that Barbara presents it as Sharon, because Barbara does a great job, but is obviously not a good thing for Sharon to want to be doing. And what ends up happening in the end there is she completely whiffs it on her part of the show. Barbara does an incredible job. She's charming and funny, and
she's just funny, but she whiffs it in everything. Like she tries to write a script and she winds up writing that god awful script that Violeta has to deliver with that guy based on what she thinks she knows is the Cuban culture because she saw a couple scenes from a couple novelas or soap operas, asked a couple people, and what turned out being a really ridiculous, embarrassing script for Violeta, right?
Can't you see? It's the same old story. Romeo and Juliet, Michael and Rosa Maria.
And even with the dance number, although Barbara, as you said, she's so funny and she's so good at interpreting this character that she's adorable when you watch her, but at the same time, messed up the whole dance, right? So
It was really great to see. And as we land this recording, because we're getting to about time, I'm glad that we landed on this because one of the things that I personally find most moving and of lasting import in this show in general and in this episode in particular is the capacity for approaching with empathy, always punching up, never punching down, difficult topics directly. The show was less afraid than a lot of shows are now, I would argue. It's certainly not afraid for its time to go directly at complex social dynamics, difficult topics, and did so with empathy, did so without excusing anybody for their foibles, for their misdeeds, their misbehaviors. So nobody is in there excusing, Sharon horning in on something that isn't about her just because she wants attention, right?
Mm.
But at the same time, doesn't flatten Sharon into not a person, right? Is still a person that is not just her least qualities. And in a time that we're living in right now, where it is very, very easy to go after people over every mistake that they make, and it's also very easy to have a knee-jerk reaction and stop people from making any legitimate criticism of things like, hey, she shouldn't have been a part of that show because it wasn't her thing to be a part of. She shouldn't have wrote a story that she didn't know about, right? Like those are real things. This show does such an exceptional job of just letting reality be and be funny, right? And watch her fail at doing this and let that tell you what it needs to tell you. And let her still be a person who isn't just that, and also be a person that needs to learn from that and do better. And I swear if we had more shows like that, if we told more stories like this, now we would be in a better place than we are right now. And that is part of why I'm so glad, as we're approaching 50 years of this show, to be celebrating it, to know that people can still find it. And I hope that it inspires people in their art, in their storytelling, when people are listening to this or watching the show who are artists, who are storytellers, to think about approaching life and approaching their work with nuance and complexity, not as a way to whitewash anything, ever, but as a way to do the actual difficult work of trying to improve things together. Because we can decide to flatten each other's humanity out for the sake of simplicity, or we can decide to do the work that is required in order to try to make things better. But we can't do both at the same time. And I love the way that this show does that. And I hope that more people connect with that too.
So I know we have to wrap this up, or we always run a little bit over. Apologies for that, because we want to stay within the construct of the timing of the show. One last thing I want to mention for my part is the song at the end that Carmen and Joe collaborate on together after Pepe has talked to his son and said, I don't know why Carmen's so proud of you, but she is, and encourages his son to help his sister to get this show together. And the song that they wrote, and I believe, I could be wrong, but I think that particular song was written by Luis, sounds like Luis's pen, really moves me even today. There are things about the culture, there are references to our culture that hits me so hard. It just feels so authentic and so real that it's mind-boggling to me, because I don't remember Cuba. I've been here since I was 2, and why do I feel so deeply Cuban when I hear things like that? So I just wanted to call out that song because you've got to see it all the way through, and really pay attention to that moment.
De donde vengo a donde voy, como he llegado a donde estoy.
That's lovely. I will say, building on that, for me, it felt like a bridge. And this goes back to how intelligent the show is sociologically, right?
I come from the land of the palm and the sun.
Where you have the kid who is finding success with what was at the time the new culture, because the context for that is that Joe did really well performing some rock and roll. That was the context in which his father says, why don't you help your sister out? He found a way to connect up with something that he was rejecting about his past, likely because he was feeling complicated things about being Cuban and American and that liminality, and he wanted to feel more like he belonged here. I felt like I picked up a lot of that in there, right? He found a bridge back to his roots through his sister, and his sister got helped out by whatever skill he has more than anything else, right? With music. That seemed to be what was happening more than the modernity of what he was doing, right? Because she's just as modern as he is. And to have a song build a bridge like that, that shows that you can exist as an in-between person, that sense of liminality that so many of us, that I know that I personally experience in a lot of intersection points in my life, is powerful. And nobody has a right to tell us that we have to choose between the parts of ourselves. We get to be our whole selves all the time. We get to celebrate being our whole selves all the time. We get to celebrate each other's whole selves without having to shrink, without having to hide, without having to tear away pieces of ourselves in order to survive. This is the show, to me, championing integration over assimilation, saying we are Cuban and we are American. We are both at the same time. Neither negates the other. The two make each other more. That's the America that I, Danny Mendoza, believe in. That is the America that I believe the show believes in. That is the America that I want my daughter to grow up in. And so I love that this show champions that in such an artistically beautiful and often incredibly funny way.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, well, that's us. Join us for episode 6, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Bye.